and welcome to another special webinar training hosted by the Mental Health Counselors of Central Florida. My name is Renee Charowitz, and I am a licensed mental health counselor and community service chair with MHCCF. On behalf of the Mental Health Counselors of Central Florida, we are so happy to have this opportunity to offer our September 2020 presentation while we all stay in the comfort and safety of our own homes and offices. The COVID-19 pandemic continues to be a force of impact to all of us, and we would like to encourage you to follow updates on the latest legislation for our field, including but not limited to laws, rules, and effective orders by going to MHCCF. The Mental Health Counselors of Central Florida organization is currently an approved provider with CE Broker for the Florida Board of Mental Health Counseling, Marriage and Family Therapy, and Clinical Social Work. So only clinicians pursuing continuing education units through the Florida 491 board will be processed. Please keep in mind that in order to qualify for CEUs for your viewing of this presentation, you'll be required to complete the post-presentation survey, which will only be sent to you via email if you have already pre-registered for the event. Details about this process again are available at mhccf.com. The email survey will be accessible until December 30th, 2020, and an on-demand option will be available for members starting on October 1st, 2020, and it will remain active until the end of the year. MHCCF is hosting this extended on-demand option as a perk for our members, in addition to their free attendance to this webinar. Upon receiving your completed survey, we will be submitting this 1-hour CEU credit through CE Broker, and we will also be sending a certification of completion to your email for your records. I would like to introduce our presenter, Lisa Minter. Lisa is a licensed mental health counselor who has worked with individuals and families in both private practice and inpatient settings for over 10 years. She is trained in EMDR, which is a trauma resolution therapy. She is active in the Greater Orlando EMDR study group. She is experienced in working with individuals and families affected by ACEs as well as adult trauma. She graduated from Rollins College in 2006 with a master's degree in mental health counseling and a certificate in marriage and family counseling. Thank you, Lisa, for agreeing to participate in this online forum with us. And MHCCF is excited to highlight your knowledge and presentation to our members and participants. Take it away, Lisa.
Hi, Renee. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, and thank you, everybody, for allowing me to speak to you today. ACEs is an acronym for Adverse Childhood Experiences. Understanding the effects of adverse childhood experiences on adult well-being can change the way you approach client problems. The information I'm about to share with you may save you and your clients both time and frustration. The ACEs study was born in San Diego, California, with Dr. Vincent Folletti. He was the chief of preventive medicine at a healthcare organization named Kaiser Permanente. He stumbled upon a connection between adverse childhood experiences and adult well-being. This happened while he was trying to figure out why there was a 50% dropout rate in the obesity clinic. I'm going to show you a portion of a video with Dr. Folletti speaking because I would like for you to hear him in his own voice tell his story of how he began to understand the significance of adverse childhood experiences.
The ACE study involves 17,337 middle-aged Americans matching their current health status at average age 57 against 10 categories of adverse life experience in childhood and adolescence, experiences that are overwhelmingly unrecognized. They're kept as family secrets. We're all taught as children that nice people don't talk about certain things, etc. The study really began in 1985 when a young woman came in to join our obesity program. She weighed 408 pounds and asked us if we could help her with her problem. Our first mistake was in accepting her diagnosis of what the problem was. And so we said yes, and we took her into the program. We were and are using the technique of supplemented absolute fasting, which allows one to take a person's weight down safely and reliably by about 300 pounds in a year. I mean, it's extraordinary to hear that. Most people don't believe it. I had photographs that I had in my presentation to illustrate what that looked like. So in 51 weeks, we took her from 408 to 132 pounds. And we thought, well, my God, we've got this problem, licked. We're going to have a world-famous Department of Preventive Medicine here. She stayed there for several weeks and then did something I had not previously conceived to be physiologically possible. She regained 37 pounds in 3 weeks. And I remember asking her, what's going on? And she said, I think I'm sleep eating. What do you mean? Well, when I go...
Renee, I'm going to start this again because I just realized I don't have closed captions on.
Okay.
So Christina, if you could start this again at the beginning, appreciate it. Thank you.
The ACE study involves 17,337 middle-aged Americans matching their current health status at average age 57 against 10 categories of adverse life experience in childhood and adolescence, experiences that are overwhelmingly unrecognized. They're kept as family secrets. We're all taught as children that nice people don't talk about certain things, etc. The study really began in 1985 when a young woman came in to join our obesity program. She weighed 408 pounds and asked us if we could help her with her problem. Our first mistake was in accepting her diagnosis of what the problem was. And so we said yes, and we took her into the program. We were and are using the technique of supplemented absolute fasting, which allows one to take a person's weight down safely and reliably by about 300 pounds in a year. I mean, it's extraordinary to hear that. Most people don't believe it. I had photographs that I had in my presentation to illustrate what that looked like. So in 51 weeks, we took her from 408 to 132 pounds. And we thought, well, my God, we've got this problem, licked. We're going to have a world-famous Department of Preventive Medicine here. She stayed there for several weeks and then did something I had not previously conceived to be physiologically possible. She regained 37 pounds in 3 weeks. And I remember asking her, what's going on? And she said, I think I'm sleep eating. What do you mean? Well, when I go to bed at night, everything's clean and put away in the kitchen. I live alone. I wake up in the morning, pots and dishes are dirty, boxes and cans are open. Somebody's obviously been cooking and eating there. I'm the only person. I have no recollection of any of this, but I used to be a sleepwalker when I was a kid. I guess that's what's happening. Okay, but why now? And after several attempts on her part to deny any awareness of why now, she finally acknowledged that it began the day someone at work sexually propositioned her. Hey, you look pretty good. You lost all that weight, Patty. How about you and me making it every week? And that was the day the sleep eating began. And I remember thinking, well, it's a pretty clumsy proposition, but I mean, this is 1986, it is Southern California. It's kind of an extreme response. Why the extreme response? And pursuing that led to a lengthy incest history with her grandfather. That lowered my threshold for childhood sexual abuse, which I certainly believed occurred, but assumed was rare. And as I began to find more cases in the obesity program, I was struck, this can't be true. It seemed every other person I was asking was acknowledging such a history. People would know if this were true. Somebody would have told me in medical school. Wasn't that what it was for? And ultimately, 186 patients later, I realized that nobody wanted to know this, but it was real. But still, I asked 5 colleagues to interview the next consecutive 100 people coming into the program, and they turned up the same thing. I presented this at a national obesity meeting in Atlanta, was attacked by the audience, who essentially said that I was naive to believe these stories that patients were saying. One guy got up and said that it was well known that these were just fabrications to provide a cover explanation for failed lives. Yeah, right. We all know we falsely claim incest for social aggrandizement. There was a dinner meeting for speakers, and that night, seated next to me was somebody from the CDC, and he said, look, if what you're saying is true, it's got enormous importance for the country as well as the practice of medicine, but nobody's going to believe your 286 cases. What we need is a large epidemiologically sound study with thousands of people in it and from a general population. Okay, well, how many? We settled on 26,000. I had an unusual department a few miles from here where 58,000 adults a year come through for unusually comprehensive medical evaluation. So we asked 26,000 if they would help us understand how events in childhood might affect adult health decades later. 71% agreed. We had a study cohort of 17,337 people, almost exactly half men, half women, average age 57, 80% white, including Hispanic, 10% black, 10% Asian, slightly less than 1% American Indian. 74% had been to college. And everybody had high-end medical insurance. This was clearly a middle-class population. And what we discovered, looking at 10 categories of adverse life experience in childhood, was extraordinary.
This is the picture of the woman that Dr. Folletti was talking about in the video. I thought it was very poignant when he said that he began to realize that sexual abuse was not uncommon. He said, this can't be true. People would know if it were true. Surely somebody would have told me in medical school. The man seated next to Dr. Folletti from the CDC turned out to be Dr. Robert Anda. He just happened to be an epidemiologist. His job was to study trends, patterns, and causes related to diseases in populations. He and Dr. Folletti teamed up to study the association between adverse childhood experiences and adult well-being. The original study was conducted between 1995 and 1997. Participants were patients at Kaiser Permanente. They were asked about their health history as well as their childhood experiences. One of the goals of the ACEs study was to see if the prevalence of ACEs found in the obesity population could be found in the general population. Folletti and Anda sorted the types of experiences into 3 groups: abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. They created a 10-question screening tool. The questions are considered the 10 categories of adverse childhood experiences. The answers to the questions are a simple yes or no. The possible scores range from 0 to 10. And this is the 10 category ACE questionnaire. The client can read the questions, or you can read the questions to the client. The answer is either yes or no. If the answer is yes, that is 1 point. If the answer is no, there are no points. So let's go ahead and read the questions. Did a parent or other adult in the household often, very often, swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, or act in a way that made you afraid that you might be physically hurt? Number 2, did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often push, grab, slap, or throw something at you, or ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured? Number 3, did an adult or person at least 5 years older than you ever touch or fondle you, or have you touched their body in a sexual way, or attempt to, or actually have oral, anal, or vaginal intercourse with you? Number 4, did you often or very often feel that no one in your family loved you, or thought you were very important or special, or your family didn't look out for each other, didn't feel close to each other, or support each other? Number 5, did you often or very often feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, and had no one to protect you, or your parents were too drunk or high to take care of you or take you to the doctor if you needed it? Number 6, were your parents ever separated or divorced? Number 7, was your mother or stepmother often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or had something thrown at her, or sometimes, often, or very often kicked, bitten, hit with a fist, or hit with something hard, or ever repeatedly hit over at least a few minutes, or threatened with a gun or a knife? Number 8, did you live with anyone who was a problem drinker or alcoholic, or who used street drugs? Number 9, was a household member depressed or mentally ill, or did a household member attempt suicide? And number 10, did a household member go to prison? You simply add up the number of yeses, and that is the score. Now, I'm not a fan of statistics, but these numbers from the study are amazing. They provide rich information about how life experiences affect us. As I turn to this next slide, remember, this was a study whose subjects were middle class and predominantly white. Anda and Folletti discovered that 2/3 of the subjects had at least one adverse childhood experience. Here is the breakdown for the number of ACEs each person reported. 38% of the participants reported more than one adverse childhood experience. 1 out of 8 people in the subject group experienced 4 or more ACEs. The number of ACEs is important. One of the things they discovered was a dose relationship. That is, the higher the number of ACEs, the higher the number of problems with health and well-being. These are the statistics for the categories of ACEs. Notice that 23 of the subjects surveyed reported physical abuse. 22 of the subjects surveyed, 22% of the subjects surveyed reported contact sexual abuse. 28% of the women in the study reported contact sexual abuse. Remember, this is a study of over 17,000 people. 24% grew up in a home without both biological parents. 27% lived with a family member who was an alcoholic or who was abusing other drugs. The ACEs study had peeled back the curtain of what is going on in our homes, in our families, and in our society. As Dr. Folletti said in the video, these things are swept under the rug, people don't want to talk about them, and they are kept as family secrets. This was new and groundbreaking information. The medical community had rejected Dr. Folletti's original findings. However, with over 17,000 participants, the study had an excellent sample of the population, and the findings could no longer be ignored. Since its original ACEs study, ACEs have been studied in multiple communities in the United States and in other countries with consistent and comparable results. Not only was the prevalence of ACEs surprising, the health and well-being outcomes associated with ACEs was just as surprising. People with positive ACE scores were much more likely to have things like obesity, depression, to be addicted to substances, to have a suicide attempt, to have autoimmune diseases. These are all issues that we see in our offices. Researchers found that people with 6 or more ACEs died nearly 20 years earlier on average than those with 0 ACEs. People with 4 or more ACEs were 60% more likely to have severe obesity. Anda and Folletti asserted that addiction highly correlates with characteristics intrinsic to that individual childhood experiences, instead of addiction being due to the characteristics intrinsic in the molecular structure of some substances. So what did we learn from the ACEs study? We learned that ACEs are very common. The average age of the participants in the study was 57. The adverse experiences reported had happened 50 to 60 years prior to the survey. In spite of the time lapse, there was a direct correlation between adverse childhood experiences and adult well-being. Also, I want you to note that traumas tended to come in clusters. 38% of the participants had more than one adverse childhood experience, and 1 out of 8 people in the subject group experienced 4 or more ACEs. Dr. Folletti says, We have learned how to take this beautiful baby and turn him into a homeless addict or a severely obese adult by exposing them to a high number of adverse experiences in childhood and not providing adequate treatment. You see, the problem with ACEs is that it happens to children, and children are not resilient without supportive, caring adults. A critical role parents and caretakers play in a child's life is to help them regulate their emotions before they have the maturity, the skills, and the tools to cope with adversity. How many times have you sat across the room from an adult client and they have said things like, "My parent didn't protect me. I felt like a burden. I feel defective, and I hate myself." These are some of the things children learn about themselves when they are exposed to adversity without protective support. Now we know that correlation does not equal causation. So why is there such a high correlation between ACEs and adult well-being decades after childhood? Stress plays a very important role in how ACEs can affect our health and well-being. Not all stress is bad. There is good stress, which causes us to grow. However, when stress becomes frequent, chronic, or uncontrolled, it becomes toxic stress. ACEs create stress for children if they do not have enough resources and support to buffer the effects of stress. I want to show you a 6-minute video which explains how ACEs affects our biology.
A child's experiences early in life are important building blocks for the developing brain. Genes, nature, are like the blueprint. They provide the basic framework for brain development. However, genes do not design the brain completely. Environmental influences, nurture, fine-tune how the brain works by shaping which brain connections get used. Connections that are used more grow stronger and more permanent, whereas ones that do not get much use fade away. Together, genes and the environment build the foundation for all future development. Safe, stable, and nurturing relationships early in life lead to healthy development. But children's brains capture other experiences as well, stressful events. However, not all stress is bad. Positive stress involves normal childhood experiences, like starting daycare or meeting a new person for the first time. This stress is essential for healthy development because it helps children develop coping skills and confidence. But when stress is frequent, chronic, and uncontrolled, it is toxic to children, especially when they do not have a caregiver to provide support or buffer the stress. Adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, such as abuse, neglect, exposure to intimate partner violence, parental depression or addiction, and poverty, are toxic stressors which could lead to lifelong changes in learning and behavior. ACEs early in development can impact social, emotional, and cognitive functioning, increased risk-taking behavior such as drinking and substance use, and increased risk of disease, disability, and social problems later in life. The question is, how do adverse childhood experiences impact a lifelong development? One of the most important systems in our body is our stress system. It's activated when we experience stress. We become alert, our heart rate increases, and so do our stress hormone levels, cortisol and adrenaline. Our body is ready to react, what is known as fight or flight. A short period of time after the stress is over, or if a child receives support from a caregiver, the stress response turns off and the body returns to a normal state. Adverse childhood experiences create stress responses that stay active, and without the support of a caregiver, the system has difficulty shutting off completely. This constant and prolonged activation can affect immune system functioning and increase the chances of sickness, infection, and disease. Prolonged activation of stress hormones is also toxic to the brain. Certain areas of the brain are more vulnerable to toxic stress, including the executive center, or the brain's control center, an area important for solving complex problems, attention, reasoning, impulsivity, inhibition, and learning. A second area is the emotional center, the brain's alarm system, which is involved in processing and interpreting emotions and the ability to control impulses. The third area is the memory and learning center, the brain's filing cabinet, which plays a major role in learning and the formation and retrieval of memories. Science shows that adverse childhood experiences impact all of these brain centers. Behaviorally, what we begin to see is emotional distress, poor emotion regulation, greater impulsivity, learning difficulties, and physical and mental health problems. More recently, science has begun to look at how ACEs cause changes in gene expression through a process called epigenetics, which helps us understand how nature and nurture interact. Epigenetics causes changes in the way genes work without changing the DNA code itself. This occurs through chemical changes influencing how the code is used. In other words, genes are like the hardware in a computer. They determine the boundaries of what is possible. However, we need an operating system to tell the hardware what to do. Epigenetics is like the operating system directing the function of a gene's DNA hardware. The genes we are born with are the genes that we have for life, but experiences like nutrition, exercise, smoking, stressors, and relationships all affect our biology. Adverse childhood experiences are associated with epigenetic changes related to stress, brain development, cognition, and systems associated with mental and physical health. Changes that happen early in brain development are more likely to be enduring and are possibly passed on to future generations as well. The good news is that positive, supportive relationships at any stage in life can make a difference. However, supporting families and children early on will help prevent many of these negative outcomes. One of the key ingredients for healthy development is having warm, loving, and actively engaged caregivers. This involves promoting serve and return interactions, where caregivers actively and warmly engage with the child, making eye contact, responding to sounds, words, gestures, emotional needs, and sharing experiences like reading and play. Providing programs that support caregivers to strengthen these abilities are the blocks that build healthy foundations for life.
So there are 3 areas of influences from ACEs. Coping is the way in which we regulate our emotional and physical states. Trauma creates dysregulation. We are not okay when we are in a state. Excuse me. Okay, this is definitely a place where we want to start over. There are 3 areas of influence from ACEs. Coping is the way in which we regulate our emotional and physical states. Trauma creates dysregulation, and we are not okay when we are in a state of emotional dysregulation. We instinctively look for ways to regulate our thoughts, feelings, and emotions and behaviors. Dr. Folletti realized that problematic behaviors are adaptive. They are solutions to clients' problems. People do things for very good reasons. People may be obese as a way of protecting themselves from the effects of childhood adversity, such as sexual abuse, emotional abuse, or bullying. Folletti realized that these cases call for a very different approach than nutritional education and physical activity. He changed the way he approached the problem of severe obesity. Instead of talking about being overweight as a problem, he introduced people to the program by asking them 3 questions. How old were you when you started putting on weight? Why then? And what are the advantages of being obese? These 3 questions are rooted in the causes of severe obesity in patients with adverse childhood experiences. Remember the quote in the slide with the man who was severely obese. He said, "I overeat because food never rejects me." I had a family come to see me because their teenage son was smoking marijuana and getting into trouble. They were upset because they thought they had a pretty good relationship with the kid. After I talked to the parents, I talked to the son without the parents being present. He had a typical, "I don't want to be here" attitude, but he was willing to answer some of my questions. I asked him where he was getting his marijuana from. Besides a few good friends, he told me that sometimes he would steal marijuana from his father's stash. Following up with the parents on this bit of information, I found out that both parents smoke marijuana in the evening, like cocktails after dinner, just to relax. However, the father also smoked a bit during the day because it helped him with his anxiety, and he did not want to be on any psychiatric medications. He was also a cigarette smoker and was overweight. Harmless, right? I want you to think about the implications of this information. It means that the son has at least one ACE the father had. It means that the son had at least one ACE. The father had an untreated anxiety disorder. It means that his parents are modeling how you cope with anxiety. You smoke marijuana, you smoke cigarettes, you eat to feel better. For those of you who have training and attachment issues, it means that the parents' mirror neurons were not available when his parents were high. His parents are physically there, but they were not able to attune to him. So what did the son do when he hit puberty and was feeling dysregulated? He looked at his parents and figured out how to manage those crazy teenage emotions, and he started smoking marijuana. The problem with unhealthy coping strategies is that they have negative consequences. You want to respect the role or the purpose of the client's maladaptive defense mechanisms, their maladaptive coping skills, and their maladaptive parts, for those of you who do parts work. These have likely helped them to survive their experiences and their environment. You want to expect the role of the defenses and the behaviors, but not the behaviors themselves. It's a very exciting time in the world of science. Our study of neuroscience is showing us answers to some of our unanswered questions about how nature and nurture interact with us. Scientists have been able to study the effects of stress on our nervous system and our brain. They've been able to use brain imaging studies to change to see changes in brain activity and brain structure. They have been able to find neural networks. They've been able to study neural networks and how they are influenced by our experiences. Another interesting note is that emerging evidence from animal studies shows that maternal exposure to stress, toxins, viral infections, and drugs can alter epigenetics in the brain and contribute to neurodevelopmental and behavioral deficits in offspring. Which brings us back to the question, are we destined to have poor outcomes if we are exposed to ACEs? The consensus is that prevention is the best response to the ACEs information. Those of you working with children and families are in a position to try to prevent long-term negative effects of ACEs by helping families and caregivers understand ACEs and understand the importance of providing strong, supportive, and attuned care. For those of us who are in the business of helping adult clients, we are in the business of remediation, that is, fixing things that are already established. We can heal. One of the very important parts of healing ACEs is helping the client to learn how to regulate his or her nervous system without using coping behaviors with long-term negative consequences. You can use things like deep breathing, exercise, mindfulness, and yoga. One of the things I like to use is a calming imagery exercise to help them build a calm place in their imagination that they can use as an internal resource. I used to have them draw on a place or circumstance they have been in that was calming to them. But now I have moved from having them use a real place or experience to creating an imaginary place where they are in complete control of what happens there. When I use real experiences, I have found that these experiences develop contamination from an experience associated with a real person or a real place that was troubling to them. And that would intrude on the memory and make the calm space ineffective. Now I ask the client to use a completely imagined and perfect place where they are in complete control of what happens there. A place where they can go to in their minds to feel calm. Another important part of healing is helping the clients build healthy coping strategies. Remember, you can't just take away their maladaptive coping strategies without first building strong, healthy coping skills and resources. I have outlined 8 points about trauma-informed therapy. Clients with high anxiety like to have things explained to them. What are you going to do in therapy? Why are you doing these things? They like to know what to expect. One of the things you can do to build safety in the present moment is to ask them if they feel safe in your office or in your video session. If they don't, ask them what is making them feel unsafe. You want to address this. If they feel safe, have them notice that sense of safety. Then you can have them practice the positive cognition. I can feel safe when I am safe. I want to talk about trauma from the lack of nurturing, the lack of attunement, the lack of attachment, the lack of positive role modeling. This type of trauma can be more difficult to unearth than the trauma that comes from being beaten up. If your parent does not attune to you, nothing bad has happened. And that is the problem. Nothing has happened that needed to happen. It is just missing. Missing can have a strong negative effect on a developing child, but it can be very difficult to understand what is missing and why they are feeling so uncomfortable. If a client denies any traumatic experiences in their childhood, sometimes they say something like, I had a good childhood. Remember, there may be more to the story. I've had several clients in this situation. The client had a parent who was an alcoholic when they were younger, but the parent became sober while they were still a child, and now they have a good relationship with the parent. These clients tend to feel guilty about talking about their parents drinking. And so on intake, they usually report to me, I have great parents. I want to come back to this later and explore it further because I know from experience that things were not great when mom and dad were constantly arguing while dad was drinking. Then dad disappeared for 3 months when he was in treatment. When he came home, he was grumpy and easily agitated for the next year of the client's life. And how was mom's parenting and nurturing affected by the stress of dad's drinking? In looking for clues that the client may have experienced ACEs, I want to talk to you about triggers. Remember that Folletti referred to this in the video when he said that the patient's reactions to being sexually propositioned was a bit extreme. It clued him in to look further into her reaction. This is how he found out about the sexual abuse. Triggers can be subtle. You want to look for a reaction to a situation that is stronger or more extreme than you would expect for that circumstance. For example, I was working with a client who was anxious about her son not doing well in math. She was not there to talk about that issue, but it would come up in the sessions periodically. Now, you would expect a caring parent to be concerned about their son doing well in school. So it took me a couple of times of talking about these issues to realize that she was being reactive to the situation. I realized that her anxiety was more than normal. I said to her, I noticed you have anxiety when we talk about how little Johnny is doing in math. Were you a good math student when you were in school? It turned out that she struggled with math in school, and it was very painful and embarrassing for her as a child. She was not just reacting anymore to little Johnny's struggle with math. She was reliving traumatic experiences of her own. We did some EMDR to address her childhood trauma around struggling with math in school as a child. After the EMDR, her anxiety about her son's trouble with math in school went way down. If they are in your office, these probably need to be strengthened. Working with a client who does not have adequate resources can re-traumatize the client and affect your rapport with that client. I had a young lady who liked science. So I would talk to her about recent findings in neuroscience and how those findings could help her manage her anxiety. Because it appealed to the scientist in her, she responded well to the information. We were able to talk about calming down the nervous system and about building new neural pathways, and this made her more open to trying new things. The client with unresolved, unhealthy traumas has a brain wired for survival. It is terrifying for them to give up their survival strategies. Changing is very scary for them. If you understand this fear, you can understand why there may be resistance in your client. Trauma produces irrational behaviors and irrational beliefs. They do not make sense. I mean, why would a college student making straight A's feel worthless as a person and be thinking about suicide? Does that make any sense? It makes sense when you know that there is a significant attachment wound from growing up with a mother who constantly criticized her. This client has never been able to feel good enough. Remember what Dr. Folletti said in the video. The patients ate food to feel better. They were using food to self-soothe. Also, having excess weight made the patient feel safe. ACEs tend to strip clients of these important elements of resilience: empowerment, choices, self-compassion, and the ability to have a voice. I had a client who had a horrendous trauma in her life. She told me about the traumas. Then she said, "I don't want to talk about this issue in my counseling sessions." I agreed that we would not talk about it. We focused on relationship problems and stage of life issues, but we did not talk about the trauma. This gave her the power to speak up for what she wanted, to have control, and to have choices. I trusted that when she is ready to address the trauma, she will. The original ACE study mostly involved white middle-class subjects. What about populations who are not white and do not live in middle-class neighborhoods? In 2012 and 2013, another ACEs study was done in Philadelphia. The creators of the study wanted to include screening questions about the effects of being exposed to stressors from living in urban areas. They created an 18-question survey with 5 categories. The 5 categories were witnessing violence, feeling discrimination, exposure to adverse neighborhood experiences, being bullied, being placed in foster care. So in addition to experiencing ACEs at home, children raised in urban areas are facing ACEs in their communities and neighborhoods. Here are the statistical outcomes from the Philadelphia study. There is now evidence that the effects of ACEs can be offset by the presence of at least one dependable and caring adult. The movie Paper Tigers is a documentary about an alternative school in Walla Walla, Washington. The neighborhood the school is in is full of gang activity and broken family systems. Aware of the ACEs study, the principal decided to change his school's approach to discipline to help students overcome traumatic events. He changed school policies to align with trauma-informed school practices. The movie provides insight into how teachers and school personnel can be instrumental in buffering some of the toxic stress these teenagers are exposed to. One of the things they discuss in the movie is that kids are not bad. The bad behavior is a symptom of what is going on in their life. I'm not going to go into further detail with the Philadelphia study, but I have included a website in this PowerPoint slide. If you want to read more information about the Philadelphia study, I have also included a link to a printable copy of the Philadelphia ACE questionnaire. Remember that a person with ACEs could also have resilient factors that have helped them heal from ACEs or have buffered the effects of ACEs. So don't assume that a client with ACEs is damaged from these experiences. I've included a slide here with the information from SAMHSA about how to put together trauma-informed practices. I've also have some slides here about resilience and how to assess for resilience. These two assessments have been formally studied. That's why I included them in the slide. Also, I have 2 slides with further resources that you can look at if you're interested. So thank you all for listening. This is the end of my presentation. I hope you find something in this presentation helpful to you. I know that I find this information very helpful when I am working with my clients.
Thank you, Lisa, for that very valuable information on the ACE study and your time presenting today. And again, just as a reminder to complete the post-evaluation and the post-quiz to receive your CEU. Thank you, everybody.